Welcome to the Man Rules Podcast. If you're looking to live with more intention, build connection, and live a more authentic, meaningful life, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dan Griffin. I don't know about you, but it seems to me that they keep changing the rules for us men without telling us. So each week, I just throw out the rule book and cover the tough topics about the real issues that men face. At the end of the day, I'm not here to tell you what kind of man you're supposed to be. I'm here to help you make your own rules and become the kind of man you want to be. So let's jump in. I thought it might be helpful to have this particular episode lay out for everyone exactly what I mean by the man rules. The way I always talk about it is it starts with a short parable that actually I got from David Foster Wallace, an amazing author, when he spoke at Kenyon College. Two fish are at the bottom of the ocean, and another fish swims up and looks at those two fish and says, "Hey guys, how's the water?" And then swims off. The two fish look at each other and they say, "Well, what the hell is water?" And that is the reality that we are constantly in. That is our consciousness that we're very often not aware of. We are always in the water. And there are fewer concepts that run deeper in the water than gender. One of the ways to better understand how deep gender runs in the water is by thinking about when a woman is pregnant. One of the first questions we often ask is, what are you having? Is it a boy or a girl? Now there's these gender reveal parties. Cut into the cake. You see blue icing, it's a boy. You see pink icing, it's a girl. Now there's no judgment about that. But before the child is even born, before that baby is breathing in this world, we begin to construct a narrative about the baby. Oh, we're having a girl. Isn't that wonderful? So let's buy the right things for this girl. Let's have a shower and make sure we get the right toys and the right gifts. Let's paint the room the right color. Let's have all the right clothes. Because we're having a girl, those are certain clothes, those are certain toys. So the narrative begins to grow, and it grows inside of the woman, inside of her partner, inside of the family. So let's just imagine that this same woman, this couple, goes in to the doctor for a visit. And the doctor comes out and says, well, I've got some good news and I've got some new news. And the good news is the baby is fine. The new news is that you're having a boy. Now imagine what happens. The narrative collapses. Everything that we thought about this child, for a lot of people, that changes. What are we going to do about the room? We have to repaint it. We have to buy different toys. What are we going to do? The narrative collapses and the child is not even born yet. And then babies are born into the water. There is research that shows that baby boys are held less, caressed less, soothed less, talked to in a different tone. All of that because they're boys. And if you put a boy in a pink blanket, that boy is treated like a girl. Soothed, talked to in a softer tone. Just given more space for emotional expression. Now, interestingly, some of the latest research is actually showing that boys are more emotional than girls on several levels, several indications. But this is the water of which I speak. And these babies are born into the water. And it doesn't matter as a family or as a home, maybe you're pretty aware and you're pretty conscious of gender roles and about not wanting to raise your daughter a certain way or your son a certain way, and you want them to have this free expression, but they still live in a world that is very much embedded in this gender idea. So for me, with my daughter, 2 years old at her daycare, a man who was about 6'4" with beautiful black hair walks in and she looks up at him and she says, "That is a very tall woman." Because there was nothing in her world that saw long hair and equated it with a man. Now, I didn't tell her that. Her mom didn't tell her that. It's what she, as a little meaning-making machine, made up about what a woman is, what a girl is, what a man is, what a boy is. And we've worked hard in many ways to make sure that she understands girls can play with superhero toys, boys can play with dolls. Pink is not a color for girls alone. But at the same time, all we have to do is walk into any department store and she sees the messages that are on the magazines, or to watch the commercials, to watch the shows, she sees the messages. And in this day and age, in the 21st century, those messages are very confused because there's no question that the roles are changing. The rules are changing. The man rules have changed dramatically in the 40 years since the great social revolution. The woman rules have changed dramatically in the last 40 years. But how conscious we have been about that and how much we understand about how deeply it runs inside of us, well, you really begin to see that when you get into relationships or when you become a parent. So these rules run deep inside of our water, deep inside of our consciousness. By the time you are an adult, you don't wake up in the morning and think about putting on your gender outfit. For the most part, most people aren't even conscious of it. They just go through the motions that they've been going through for so many years, and they put on their gender outfit. Now, there are some people for whom they're very aware of gender and their gender outfit because they don't fit the norm. But it's all made up. You can look to other cultures and you can see that what we in Western culture often identify as being equated with women, in that culture, Morocco and other areas, only men of the highest station can wear dresses or makeup. Some African tribes, that's the case as well. There are man rules and woman rules in every society. Our world has been built around this dichotomy, which is really a false dichotomy, but this dichotomy that says there is male and female, or there is feminine and there is masculine. And that is the water, because we are not consciously spending time deconstructing that or really thinking about that. Well, that's just how girls are. Oh, she's such a girl. Look at her. Oh, that is definitely a boy. That's a boy's hand. Look at that hand. That's a hand that'll grip a football. Take the exact same size hand, but it's a girl's hand. Oh, look at that hand. It's so delicate. The meaning we make up, that's all part of the water. Constantly immersing ourselves in the water, not aware of how deeply it runs, not aware that it's made up. There is no inherent meaning in a dress. If you gave a bushman from the Kalahari a dress, they may or may not know what to do with it. It is not feminine to them. It does not have an inherently feminine construct. And yet, if you really want to understand how deeply connected to our emotional being, to the ontology of who we are, then why would we be killing people, literally killing people who decide that what they want to wear and how they want to express themselves may not match the genitalia of their body? Because that's what's happening. The transgender conversation that is exploding in our world is a conversation for all of us, because it's ultimately about being authentic and being yourself. But being that way in a world that is so heavily immersed in this dichotomy, in these boxes that Paul Keevil, an amazing man who has talked about these ideas for some time, the man box that he's talked about, and the woman box. These are boxes that we get placed into that constrict our ability to express ourselves. So when it comes to the man rules, and the whole point of this podcast is to help everybody see the water. And it's not about judgment. It's not about saying, well, this is the man you have to be. This is masculinity that's good. This is masculinity that's not good. It's absolutely about a concept that I call conscious masculinity. Be the man you feel moved to be. Be who you are. You have a lot of emotion. Be that man. You feel moved to do something that is quote unquote feminine. do that because that's what moves your spirit. But the problem is that we still live in a society that shames boys for showing up a certain way, that shames girls into showing up a certain way. And that shame and that trauma drives so much of how we respond to these rules. That is one of the main ways that we teach people to be boys and girls. Not very often through affirmation, but often through you have to do this or you will suffer consequences. You have to not do this or you will suffer consequences. And often those consequences are social rejection and isolation, from the form of rejection to abuse and violence. These are why I call them the rules. There is a coercive aspect to them. There are consequences when we don't follow them. And very few of us have been given any choice about this. Nobody sat us down and said, well, here are the man rules. Let's review them. Here, son, let's review the man rules. Now, I've spent a lot of my life not crying, and it's really been affecting me in my relationship, and I drink myself into a stupor every night because I have no emotional expression. Maybe this is not one you want to follow. That's not how it works. We take them on through multiple factors. So you can have a pretty enlightened home, like I said earlier. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to be deeply impacted by the schoolyard and what happens on the schoolyard. And if anybody thinks that the power of these rules has been somehow eliminated because of our increasing awareness around gender and our freedom of expression, then just go to a 6 or 7-year-old party and you will see how deeply the dichotomy still runs. Go to a toy store and look at the aisles. Look at one area and look at how clearly they're marketing toys to boys and toys to girls. They can be the exact same toys. The exact same blocks are one color and show boys doing certain boy activities on the cover of the box. The exact same blocks are now pink and pastel colors and they show girls doing girl activities. That is part of the water. There was a manufacturer that put out a pen, a specific pen for women. Ellen DeGeneres did a great job of mocking that because it's absurd. There's a degree of absurdity. If there's one emotion that I have found that is permeating our culture, permeating men and women and boys and girls, it appears to be confusion. There is this mass confusion happening internally. Well, when are the rules relaxed? When are they not relaxed? When am I going to be laughed at? When am I going to be accepted? When do I have permission to truly be who I am? When can I fully share the pain and the confusion I'm feeling about how to show up as a man, as a husband, as a partner, as a father? All of that is part of the water. All of that is part of the man rules. So when I do this exercise with audiences, I often will have them name the man rules. And no matter where I go, country I'm in, no matter what state I'm in, the exact same rules come up all the time. And very often, the first ones that come up, in fact, the very first one that comes up 99% of the time is don't cry. That is a huge rule. And as a trained sociologist, I look at the meaning underneath the meaning. So in that one rule of don't cry, there are numerous other rules. Don't be vulnerable. Don't be weak. Don't share feeling. And of course, the don't share feelings rule is a little bit more complicated. The don't share feelings rule is boys don't share softer feelings. You're allowed anger, and you're also allowed this idea that everything's cool, everything's good. But that's about it. It's as if we take this amazing box of crayons that's full of all these beautiful, vibrant colors. And we take the majority of the colors out, and that is what we give boys and men for their emotional expression. And then we say, and be happy. Oh, and don't hurt anybody with that anger. This is the water. These are the man rules, and the don'ts are very heavy. And with those prohibitions and connected to that, you have be a provider, be strong, you have integrity, have discipline. And yet, so interestingly, when I do this exercise, the vast majority of the time, for those more positive attributes and aspects of masculinity, I have to actually coax the audience into giving them. I have to lead them a little bit and say, well, wait a second, what's the general tone of these rules? It seems to be more negative. What are the positives? Because while the positives are there, they aren't there nearly as loud as the don'ts. And those don'ts are incredibly important when it comes to understanding the man rules. Because that means so much of who men are is who we are not. That much of our identity is built around who we are not supposed to be, who we can't be, than who we are. Interestingly enough, if you look at these don'ts, don't ask for help, don't share feelings, don't be vulnerable, don't cry, don't be weak, and you get rid of the don't, ask for help, feel feelings, be vulnerable, be relational, we tend to associate those with girls and women. So at the heart of the man rules, at the heart of how we raise boys, is not only these don'ts, but this deep sense of don't be a girl, don't value what we associate with girls and women. And that runs so deep inside of men's psychology and men's sense of being and awareness. We can't ignore that. For 90% of those of us who want to have partners and want to have intimacy, we're getting into relationships with the same people who tend to show the attributes and characteristics that we've been taught not only to reject, but to hate, to mock, and to feel shame about in ourselves. That is part of the water. That is something that can explode when men and women get into relationships. That is part of the water that we have to pay attention to. And if there is one core concept that is so critical to understanding how all of this podcast is going to work, at the essence of everything that I talk about and the message that you will hear week after week after week, it is simply that the way and the reason that we follow these rules, these man rules, the way we internalize them and the reason we hold them so close, very often without even realizing that we're doing it, is because whether it's because we get acceptance, whether it gives us confidence, at a deeper level, it gives us safety. And that is so incredibly important when understanding how boys and men show up. When I stopped crying, I stopped being made fun of. When I stopped asking for help, I stopped being told I was stupid. When I stopped showing any kind of weakness, I stopped feeling as though I didn't fit in. When I started playing more competitive sports, I felt more like a boy. All of those are deep inside of my experience, and they show up in my relationships. They show up in my relationship with my partner, Nancy, and with my daughter, Grace, and with my friends, and with the work that I do. All of that is the water, and these rules are so deeply embedded in who we are. But when they are about our safety, whether it's safety that works or not, is not really something our brain, that limbic part of our brain, cares about. It simply knows that I want safety. So as a fairly conscious man, as a man who's been walking a very conscious path for a very long time, if you put me in a stressful situation, if you put me in a corner, I will struggle not to go back into the man rules. When you add shame and trauma that so many men experience, particularly in how we learn these rules, and that those rules then become safety for us, whether the safety works or not. When there is shame and trauma that gets triggered as adults, our limbic brain knows, wow, if I just shut down, I can't be hurt. If I use anger to push the person away, they can't hurt me. It might destroy the relationship, but they're not going to hurt me. And this is where we make up all this stuff about men. We see the external behaviors of men, and then we say, well, that's just how men are. I mean, just think about the man rules for sex. We always talk about how sex-crazed men are, but when I do this conversation with audiences and I say, well, what are the man rules around sex? Well, have as much sex as you can. Get laid as often as you can. The more you get laid, the more you're a stud. All of this. In fact, I've distilled it down into one core sentence. Have as much sex as possible, whenever possible, with as many hot and different chicks, girls, right? We don't use the term women, as possible, with as big of a dick as possible. We could spend hours deconstructing that sentence. But if we're really not wanting to be confused about why men show up and struggle so much with intimacy and relationships, look at what we've given men as a source for connection and intimacy. You can't be vulnerable, but you can have sex. Sex is intimacy for so many of us, at least that's what we learn. We wonder why men turn to porn. Porn is so easy. Porn is not going to reject us. Porn is not going to laugh at us. Porn doesn't care what size we are. Porn doesn't care how we treat it. Porn is always available, always wants us, but doesn't need us to open up. Of course we turn to porn because we haven't been given very often the relational skills necessary to engage in a relationship beyond sex. And yet so many of us men desperately want that. We want those relationships. So another core concept that I'll come back to throughout this podcast every week, over and over again, is that what we have to fundamentally realize is that the concepts and the principles of personal growth and intimate, healthy relationships are fundamentally opposed to most of the man rules. We tell men not to cry, and then we say, get in touch with your feelings. Don't share your feelings other than anger. And then we say, well, you have to get vulnerable and show more feelings. You don't ask for help? Well, you have to ask for help. You have to be part of it. Always win? No, you have to share power. You have to work together to compromise. Intimacy equals sex. Sex is only one part of the relationship. And in fact, in a lot of relationships, if there's not connection and healthy intimacy, you're not going to have sex. My wife says all the time, sex is a barometer for the relationship. It's a very powerful statement. And a lot of men don't understand that. Then again, we were at a marriage counseling and we heard a very powerful statement. Now, I don't think this is necessarily some biological reality or this is just men and women, period. But when men and women are really immersed in the rules and not able to really step into authenticity and vulnerability, and when we've had years and years of telling men that sex defines connection and sex defines our value, sex defines whether somebody loves us, and then we tell women that your sexuality is not yours, if you use it too much, you're a slut, or there's something wrong with you, and that love is more important than sex. Bring those two together, and then very often what you'll have is what I heard in that couples session. When women feel loved, they have sex. And men feel loved when they have sex. And you've got that tension very often operating. But if you're not aware of it, if you can't communicate that becomes a huge challenge. All of this is the water. All of this is about the man rules. I'll be doing another podcast that really talks about the woman rules because we have to. We have to talk about the man rules, the woman rules, and simply the rules that say gender has to be a certain way. And again, that's the gift of the transgender conversation, is that it's saying, well, actually, no. Not only does gender not have to be a certain way, it actually never is a certain way. We treat masculinity as if it's fixed. But just think about, if you're a man listening to this, think about how you might show up at work versus how you show up in a relationship versus how you show up as a father versus how you show up at one age versus another age. In one relationship versus another relationship. Those are all different degrees and expressions of masculinity. The man rules are actually more fluid than we think. And yet we're constantly putting each other in boxes. And that's why I advocate conscious masculinity. Just be yourself. Be that man. You can't go wrong if you are true to yourself. If you're not aware of the rules will decide your behavior a lot of the time. I've watched it happen in my life over and over again. I have pretty high awareness, and yet a lot of the times in my interactions, the man rules make the decision because of that piece around safety, because of wanting to fit in. And so I will very often go against my values, go against the man I want to be because of fear, because of insecurity, because of actually just consciously saying this is not a place where I feel safe enough to let that guard down. All of that is the water. The more we begin to see it, the more we immerse ourselves in this consciousness, the more we realize how deep it runs, how much in my interactions with my partner, with her woman rules and my man rules, how much it takes just for me to say my feelings are hurt, instead of being angry or sulking or saying nothing. What does it mean for a man to feel afraid or to feel hurt and to be able to express that when it's so contradictory to how we've been raised? When for so many men, that's connected to our trauma and to the shame that we have about who we are. So to say to my partner, my feelings are hurt, when that's actually what's true. We could pretend that we're angry, but underneath the anger is usually fear and hurt and insecurity. But what does it take to get to a place where we can communicate that? What does it get to a place where we can openly cry or express our feelings and affection? All of that is what we're going to be looking at in all the different areas of our lives with this podcast. That is the water, and the water runs very deep. So this is just an overview of the man rules and how the man rules show up in our lives and what the man rules are. And the fact that, contrary to what some of my audiences sometimes seem to want, is you're never out of the water. What happens to a fish when it's out of the water? It dies. Well, that is what we're talking about. It is not about getting out of the water. It is not about it having to look a certain way. It is about awareness. Awareness, awareness, awareness. Awareness that it runs deep. Awareness that if you get into judgment, you'll lose sight of the consciousness, of the ability to choose. My greatest goal with this podcast is to offer additional information, additional guidance for men, including myself on my own journey, that supports us in being the men, the fathers, the husbands, the brothers, the partners, the sons, the lovers that we really want to be, and not letting the rules make that decision for us. And when the rules inevitably do make that decision for us, that we are able to truly see that. It is a real passion of mine to help men and women have these tough conversations. That's what this podcast will be about. I am truly committed to showing the world and men themselves just how amazing we are and how much of our behavior does not reflect who we are as much as who we've been told we have to be. You see, I fundamentally believe the problem is not men in our society. The problem is how men have been raised. The problem is not the man rules. The problem is that we don't have enough flexibility in how the man rules show up. Are there times where it's safer and better not to cry? Absolutely. Is there benefit to not asking for help? Yes. But if not asking for help means that you're going to lose everything in your life that's important to you, if not being able to share your feelings means that you spend your whole relationship down in the basement or in another room watching sports, that's what I'm talking about. That consciousness, that ability to choose, that ability for men to become more and more comfortable sharing their inner lives. That is the full intent of this podcast. I'm so excited to put this out there and to have this conversation. I'm sure over the weeks and months and years, I'll be making tons of mistakes. I will check in about my own journey and the ways that week I was definitely not the man I wanted to be. But as I love to say, it's not about doing it perfectly, it's about doing it consciously. Thanks so much for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Follow us on Facebook at The Man Rules Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Man Rules Podcast, and even Instagram, Man Rules Podcast. I look forward to having this ongoing conversation. So remember, don't let the rules rule you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Man Rules Podcast, where we don't let the rules rule us. If you have ideas for guests, topics, or even want to be a guest, send us an email at ideas@themanrules.com and check out our website and everything we're up to at themanrules.com. The only question we have to ask is what kind of man you want to be and what's keeping you from being that man.